We are standing almost on the top of Mount Hor, H-O-R. It's in the territory of Edom, and we're looking west toward the Mediterranean Sea, but right in our foreground there's a long, wide valley that runs north and south, and that is the Arava, A-R-A-V-A-H. On the opposite side of the Arava, beginning at that kibbutz and going southwest, is another valley, and that is the desert of Paran, P-A-R-A-N, that the Bible talks about. It was right after Moses struck the rock the second time and the water came out that it says that from Kadesh Moses sent messengers to the king of Edom, and they say, this is in Numbers chapter 20, verse 14, and then in verse 15, it says, "Behold, we are at Kadesh, a town on the edge of your territory. Please let us pass through your land. We will not pass through a field or a vineyard. We won't even drink the water from your well until we have passed through your territory and left." And Edom said, "No, you can't pass." It was at this time, still in Numbers chapter 20, that we hear the Lord spoke to Moses, verse 23, and to Aaron at Mount Hor, which is right behind us, by the border of the land of Edom, saying, "Aaron shall be gathered to his people. He will not enter the land that I have given to the sons of Israel, because you rebelled against my commandment at the waters of Meribah." Verse 25, "Take Aaron and his son Eleazar and bring them up to Mount Hor, and strip Aaron of his garments and put them on his son Eleazar. So Aaron will be gathered to his people, and there he will die." Verse 28, "And so Aaron died there on the mountaintop. And then Moses and Eleazar came down from the mountain. When the congregation had seen that Aaron had died, then all of the people of Israel wept for Aaron for 30 days. So from the Arava Valley and the wilderness of Paran, the Israelites crossed over here. Moses, his brother, and his brother's son Eleazar ascended this mountain, Mount Hor, which the Talmud describes as a mountain, an apple on top of a mountain. We've just come from the top there, where there's a 14th century AD mosque commemorating that death of Aaron, and spent time worshiping and also studying scripture on top of the mountain.
Who said that this is where Aaron was buried?
You can use the Hebrew.
If I said it, it's not good enough. If a number of us will say it, it's still not good enough. But if the Bible gives us at least a hint that this is the place, now we're talking. And so we'll soon read from the Bible, but I just want to point out, okay, that this is the land of Edom. And right where we're staying is where the King's Highway was going through. Still going through to this day. The official name of the road that passes through the village where we stay is the King's Way, which in Hebrew, Derech HaMelech, became like a nickname for anything that you do that follows a main path, that is mainstream. Let's do it Derech HaMelech, even if it's no road that we're talking about at all. And so, why do people think that this is up here? Because this is the land of Edom, and the Israelites, 600,000 of them, let's say, have had to walk along a major road. They couldn't go up here like we did. Even the Bible tells you that Aaron and his assistant Eleazar came up here. Pretty much just them and maybe a few other assistants, and that's it. You couldn't bring a whole nation up here, but they could take the king, but they were able to take the King's Highway and actually follow the main trunk route that brings them from where we came yesterday all the way to Mount Nebo, where Moses will die, when he will get a different view of the land of Israel that Aaron had. And then Joshua will take over, and they will cross the Jordan River and get to take Jericho. But before that, how do we know that this is the place? The Bible tells us a number of times, in Numbers 20, in Numbers 34, and somewhere else, that Moses and Eleazar, for the sins they committed, right? Not Moses, Aaron and Eleazar, went up to a place called, in your English translation, Mount Hor. Please note that in the Hebrew version of the Bible, which is what counts, with your permission, no offense taken, this mountain has no name at all. There's no name for this mountain at all. In Hebrew, when you want to say a name of a mountain, you first say the word mount and then you say the name of it, like Mount McKinley, like Mount Everest, like Mount Carmel, like Mount Hermon, Mount of Olives. When you want to give a name to a certain mountain, you first and foremost mention the word mount and then you give the name. But when you go back to Numbers 20 and Numbers 34, you hear the word mount coming after the word that is connected with it, which in Hebrew is Hor, which actually means that that mountain doesn't have a specific name. But the one translating this term Hor into Hebrew did not know Hebrew, into other languages, did not know Hebrew that well. And he assumed that when you hear the name Har, everything connected to it must be the name of that mountain. No. Hor will be translated later on by Jewish rabbis to be a term describing apple on top of an apple, or a mountain on top of another mountain. And so you guys climbed up, and then everything became flat, and then you climbed up again. And when you look at this mountain from afar, you get an even better understanding of what a mountain on top of the mountain is.
And what word means that?
Hor, H-O-R, and then a new word, but connected to the first one, H-A-H-A-R. Hor is not Mount Hor at all. It's just a description of how the mountain looks like from afar. And please note that this is the only mountain in the area where we're at that actually looks like that. So it's a mistaken translation that brought people to think that this mountain even has a name. It doesn't. That's number one. Number two, we hear that this is on the verge or the border of the land of Edom. Go figure what were the borders of Edom back then and where the Israelites were going through. But assuming they've had to go along the King's Highway, which is very close to where we are, and assuming that Aaron at the age of 123 couldn't go from the King Highway that far off, and that we are not that far off from the King's Highway, it could make sense that this would be the place from which he actually departed with Eleazar, his assistant, to go up to and to die. But the question you ask yourself, Aaron died at the age of 123. That detail that he died at the age of 123 helps us to understand that he was in a good physical shape if he actually made it up here before he died.
Yeah.
And that helps us to understand that it wasn't the uphill that made him die, but rather God's decision that he will die. It wasn't the physical effort that made him die, it was a decision that he will die. And someone else took it, not Aaron. We'll allude to that when we get to talk about Moses later on as well. Because it's the same correlation between the age of Aaron and how much he had to climb, and the age of Moses and how much he had to climb. And so the Bible gives us details that already hint towards this location. Now fast forward to a person called Yosef ben Matityahu, that later on was renamed Josephus Flavius. He wrote 4 books. One of them is called Antiquities of the Jews. Mr. Josephus Flavius, never mind his character now, was someone who actually started writing down 800 years of Jewish history before his day and age. In that book, Antiquities of the Jews, he's dialing back to the 8th century BC. That's how early he goes. Is this true? Is this true, Wave?
He goes back to Moses.
He goes back even to Moses. And so everything he writes in that book is suspected to be borrowed from traditions that go way before his day and age.
Yeah, he goes back to Abraham.
And so if Mr. Josephus Flavius in Antiquities of the Jews writes that the tomb of Aaron is next to Petra, which existed as a huge metropolis in his day and age, then he's expecting people to know where Petra is, and he's expecting people to understand that the tomb of Aaron is somewhere near Petra. And that could be a tradition that dials back hundreds, if not over 1,000 years before Josephus Flavius, which brings us to the days of Moses and Aaron.
So what are you saying? Can you make it a little plainer? You're saying
Josephus locates Aaron's tomb
Next to
in
Petra.
this area.
So the Bible gives you general understanding.
does it also give us a history of how long Petra was here?
He's describing Petra, but because there's no doubt that that is Petra,
Yeah,
and that we are close to Petra,
yeah,
we are suspecting again that this is the place.
yeah.
Because of the shape, because of the biblical description, because of Josephus Flavius. Now the Byzantines are coming along.
So Josephus also describes
The
this-
tomb of Aaron.
Yeah.
Yes, next to Petra.
Yeah.
That's almost an X marking the spot. But then you have the Byzantine tradition, which if it stands by itself, is not always that good. But when you add it to everything we discussed so far, and you see the remains of the Byzantine church that back down there, that the Finnish excavation team has excavated over 20 years ago, they built it up here because they had a good reason for it. Who builds a church up here unless he had a really good reason for it? And they built it in honor of Aaron.
Yeah, and it's not like it's a tourist trap. It doesn't cost any money to come up here. I mean, you got to be a little bit mentally ill to come up here or lead a group up here.
And then you go to Jewish sources, one that's called the Talmud. And in the Talmud, it's described, that the tomb of Aaron is on a mountain that has no name, but is described by his physical features, and it's like an apple on top of another apple. It's like a mountain on top of another mountain. Also, ב-12 או ב-10?
Yes, I would way rather have him.
20 דקות.
20 דקות אתה צריך? אתה צריך 20 דקות?
זה בסדר בשבילך?
אוקיי, אך רבע שעה.
רבע.
רבע שעה.
אוקיי? רבע שעה.
That's when they're talking about how stupid we are. These stupid tourists followed us up here.
Mom?
All right, guys, we're going to do a whole book in the Bible in 15 minutes.
All right, everybody wave your attention. Thanks.
So if you didn't have your stuff tied down tight before, you'll have it tied down tight before when we get finished with a whole book of the Bible in 15 minutes. So if you can, if you've got it digital or you got hard copy, go to the book of the prophecy of Obadiah. This is a book you've probably never read before anyway, so we'll be cutting new ground, on new ground.
If you've been going to New Hope long enough, you have, because I preached through it.
Obadiah, have you?
Open to chapter 1.
Okay, so pastors preach through it. That means you probably have visited Obadiah before. Obadiah, it means the servant of Yahweh. And that's what the prophets were anyway, so this works pretty well from the title of the book. So Obadiah, I'll give you a real quick historical overview. Obadiah is living as more or less a contemporary of Jeremiah and Ezekiel. And he is actually observing, he's an eyewitness of the destruction of Jerusalem in 587 BC by the Babylonian forces of King Nebuchadnezzar. And he is an eyewitness then to the destruction of the temple, the demolition of Jerusalem, and the exile of God's people to begin a 70-year period of absence from the country in exile in Babylon. So this is the historical context of Obadiah, the servant of Yahweh.
So he's a contemporary of Jeremiah and Ezekiel.
Yeah.
And saw the destruction in 5.
Saw the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. So the vision of Obadiah. Thus says Yahweh God concerning Edom. We have heard a report. Edom, that puts us right where we are right now.
Chapter 1, verse 1.
Yeah. So we have heard a report from Yahweh. An envoy has been sent among the nations, saying, Arise and let us go against her for battle. Behold, I will make you small among the nations. You are greatly despised. The arrogance of your heart has deceived you. These guys had allied with the Babylonians. And the Babylonians were agents of God's destruction, for sure, of his judgment of his own people. But these guys piled on.
So the Edomites and the Babylonians were
allied,
allies.
right?
They were allies.
Right, and you'll see the way that the Edomites helped strengthen the hands of the Babylonians. The Babylonians are hundreds of miles from home, but the Edomites join forces with them and then make the destruction even worse than what God had decreed. They went.
And then in the Second Temple period, the Nabateans are helping the Romans to destroy the temple again.
Right. Which is an interesting historical echo, kind of history repeating itself. Not the same people group, but living in the same area.
So the Edomites ended up helping the Babylonians in the destruction of Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So he continues this description in verse 8 of Edom's destruction. Will I not on that day, Bayom Hahu, when it says that in the prophets, it means in the prophetic future, at the time of kind of almost like end time judgment. On that day, declares Yahweh, destroy the wise men from Edom. So all the way back as far as the book of Job, the Edom has been viewed as kind of a seat of wisdom, some kind of a place of great learning and a place of the origin of wise men and wise teaching from back in the mists of time. So this is what Obadiah is tapping into here. But their wisdom their riches are going to be carried off and their wisdom is going to be destroyed. Destroy the wise men from Edom. All right, so now we're hearing this talked about in verse 1. It's called Edom. In verse 6, it's called Esau. In verse 8, it's called Esau and Edom. And then in verse 9, then your mighty men will be dismayed, O Teman. There's another way that Edom or Esau, this area is described. There's yet another way in the Bible. I don't think that it shows up in Obadiah, but it's sometimes called Seir, S-E-I-R, or Mount Seir. Seir. Seir.
S-I-E-R.
S-E-I-R.
Yeah. And
Timan,
yeah.
T-I-M-O-N.
T-I-M-A-N in verse 9. So you've got the same area called by about a half a dozen different names. Then your mighty men will be dismayed, O Teman, in order that everyone might be cut off from the mountain of Esau. Do you see that Teman and Esau is the same thing? By slaughter. Because, listen to this, now he's really getting down to here's what the offense of Edom, Esau, Teman, Seir is, and that is, because of your violence to your brother Jacob, you will be covered with shame. I have a question for you real quick. What was the primary cause of the judgment that God brought on the whole world in the days of Noah? There's only one place, one thing in the Bible that the Bible buttonhole says specifically this. There's evil, there's
Godlessness?
It's even more specific than that. It's because violence increased on the face of the earth. That is, guys, one of the primary markers of the time right before cataclysmic judgment falls. And so here again, because of the violence that you did to your brother Jacob, you will be covered with shame and cut off forever. On that day, you stood aloof. There's again that reference to a high altitude. Remember the rocky peaks? Okay. You stood aloof. And on that, in other words, they needed your help, your brother by blood, related by Abraham, needed your help, and instead what you did was you piled on. As you have done, it will be done to you. Your dealings will return on your own head. Now, this is not all doom and gloom. Look at verse 17. But on Mount Zion there will be those who escape. And somebody used the word when we got up here, we are the remnant. We're the only ones that made it to the top of the mountain. We're the remnant. Obadiah is following people like Jeremiah and Isaiah, and they're saying, yes, She'ar Yashuv, a remnant will return. Boy, have they. Here's one of them right there, sitting right in front of you, one of the remnant.
Remnant Gil.
Then the house of Jacob will be like a fire, like a light, like a signal fire.
Sure.
And the house of Joseph a flame. But the house of Esau will be like stubble. They're going to be burned up by that fire. So that there will be no survivor at the end of verse 18 among the house of Esau. In verse 21, and the kingdom will be Yahweh's. The kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our God and of His Christ, and He will reign forever and ever. Book of Revelation, chapter 11. That's the way that this all ends.